Josh, it's great to see you. And I feel like I have to start by saying it's hard to believe that anyone would not know who you are if you're on LinkedIn and you've looked for a job in K-12 education. But assuming there maybe are a few people out there who don't know you, could you start by kicking things off with a quick introduction and background on yourself?
First, thank you for having me on. Longtime listener, first time guest, so that's fun. So absolutely, my name is Josh. Last name is Zuprick. And so it's way easier said than it is read. You're right. Been the K-12 jobs class guy for about 2.5 years. I can give the 30-second overview. Graduated from the University of Florida. I'm a Florida native. I worked on Capitol Hill. That was where I thought that my career would go. I went to a pizza session from an organization called Teach for America my senior year. And I was like, I'll take a 2-year break and then I'll head right back. And 18 years later, I'm still here in K-12 education. So in that, I started as a teacher for the last 9 years. I've been on senior leadership teams in school districts and charter school networks. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've had this organic spreadsheet turn into a side hustle, turn into a main hustle of helping folks who want to transition do so for free and confidentially.
Officially a main hustle very recently. So I feel like we need to get the origin story. How did that happen? So you have the educator story, TFA snags you. You end up in leadership roles, administrative roles. Like, how do you build out this spreadsheet? Why are you so passionate about helping people find a good job? Was this from a personal experience, maybe friends? I'd love to get a little bit on sort of what the original impetus was.
Absolutely. So the last time I looked for a job was at the end of the 2021-22 school year. And transparently, after COVID, I was really tired, and I had been, I think we all were, right?
You and everyone else.
I've been in the charter world for 15 years, and I wanted to do something different. And from the moment I decided that I wanted to look for something to the moment that I was announced to be a senior leader at the lab schools, the University of Memphis, was a 4-week time period. That's rare, as I've learned over 2.5 years, right? And what I started to notice is, so I get this job. I have a lot of friends who are like, how'd you get the job? Like, where did you go? How did you look? I want a job. I'm tired. I was like, yeah. And so my first ever jobs blast was not a spreadsheet. It was a very basic Google document where when I talked to a few of my friends, I said, well, you would go to ANET and you'd go to Teach for America and they were like, I don't know what you're saying. And so I went to 4 places. I went to like PES, TNTP, and I copied their jobs just straight into a Google document and said, hey, there are about 60 jobs here. See if you qualify for any and apply. Well, 2 weeks later, I updated. People started organically, hey, can I share this with somebody? Sure, it's public. And that went on for about 3 months. And then I love a good Peloton ride. And I had this epiphany on the Peloton where I was like, wait a minute, I got a job in 4 weeks, start to finish. And I'm helping people get jobs, but I'm starting to notice that almost exclusively my friends who I'm helping who did not know about organizations or where to look, et cetera, were non-white. And they were not the way that I look. I'm a straight presenting white male, right? And I started to have this reflection of, we keep saying we want diverse hiring pools, but if a diverse set of candidates doesn't know where to look, is the pool actually diverse? And so that was the impetus for the first spreadsheet, where I was like, wait a minute, we could actually start to bring together different job sites, put them in one place, organize them in one way, and let people who are looking for a job search actually know what's out there.
So let's talk more about why people are looking for a new job. So now that we've got the origin story, obviously this has grown tremendously from just over the last couple of years. And as you mentioned, you had a lot of friends who had a very similar experience. They were tired and maybe ready to try something new, maybe just looking for a new organization. This has been a hot topic in K-12, and a lot of ink and words have been spilt over the teacher crisis and people leaving the profession. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about your perspective. Obviously, you meet a lot of people who find the jobs blast, you get people referred to you. What are you hearing as far as why people are looking for something new? Has the original kind of COVID exhausted sort of impetus changed, or do you feel like there's still a lot of the same themes in the market?
The number one thing that people cite on the surface is money, right? That we don't pay teachers or administrators enough. And I 100% am on board. I believe that every penny you can put towards keeping great people in schools, you should do that. But I think we've also all watched charter schools and districts who have really upped the ante in salaries still lose people. And so one question I've been asking folks, I joked the other day that my LinkedIn message box feels like an Ann Landers column, right? Where people will just write to me their frustrations, and I tried to engage back, but I was like, if you could just demand any salary at your school to stay as the fourth grade math teacher, but nothing else changed, would you stay?
They were like, great question.
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I was like, great. Yeah. That means get money. Absolutely. You got to pay your bills, right? Take home pay matters. HR is one of the functions that I oversaw in my last district, and Gen Z, you can talk benefits, you can talk all the things. They want to know what the take home pay is. So yes, every penny to take home pay. And you got to think about working conditions. What I've really started to dig in with folks about, okay, well, if you could wave the magic wand, what would you change and why? The biggest themes that come up are time flexibility, right? Number two is respect. And number three is decision autonomy. And I feel like those three buckets really, for me, undergird why teachers are quitting en masse. Money is absolutely on the surface. And again, I will never shortchange that money matters. But if you don't change the working condition, money alone will not solve the problem.
That's really insightful and interesting to think about how flexibility and autonomy tie into some of the broader shifts in the workforce. Obviously, post-COVID, there's a lot more people working remote. I'm sitting in my house. You're sitting in your house. We're both talking about our kids. How big of a factor do you feel like the sort of societal shift to more people having friends who are working remote, more companies offering hybrid or remote work, how big of a pull do you feel like that is on the education space? Or do you feel like it gets kind of overhyped in other industries like tech, where a lot of people, just work all day from their computer?
I think it has a factor. And I also think there's the, if you're in office at a tech firm and they've got the free cafeteria and, that's not happening in K-12, right? I think it absolutely has a factor. But there are obviously careers and professions, nursing, firefighting, police work, education, that demand that you're not remote, or that doesn't mean you can't be flexible. And I think you just named that. So what does hybrid look like in a K-12 environment? What does flexibility look like in a K-12 environment? How can you still participate in your child's drop off and pickup and still be a K-12 educator, right? When I ask people, why do you want a remote job? It's not remote. It's not that stereotypical, oh, I never want to leave my house. People don't go into teaching in a classroom because they don't have a passion for educating kids. But there's something that we're doing in classrooms across the country that are causing people to want to leave and want to go find somewhere else. So to answer your question long and short, it is truly, for me, remote has an impact, but I really think it's more about flexibility.
Yeah, deeper issues there. Okay, well, let's talk about some of the recommendations you have. You've been a leader, you've led schools. You talk with leaders now in your current work at the Jobs Blast. I believe you also do consulting work for leaders. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you feel like organizations can take to heart to mitigate some of these losses, and maybe say, okay, we can't offer all the money in the world, but if that's not actually what would keep all our teachers here and it's kind of money plus, let's talk about some of those things. So I thought we could start with kind of the nature of the job hunt. A lot of people talk about jobs being cyclical in nature. K-12 is unique in that we have the academic year that kind of guides the ebbs and flows of our work and our lives. Could you start by maybe giving us some perspective on how leaders can be better prepared for sort of the peaks and valleys of the hiring season?
Absolutely. It's been really interesting because I now have 29 months of job data, right? So I have 81,000 rows in a data set that shows me, how long does a job stay open? When does it post? What's the category? And exactly to what you mean about cyclical, academic, school leader, and senior leader roles really start to publish in January, and they just tick up all the way through July. We have this apex, and then there's a drop down, right? So when you're thinking about your teachers or your school leaders who are transitioning, I would, from what I'm gathering, most are preparing in honestly October, November, and December for those January and February launches. What I tell school leaders is you need to start having conversations about retention for the next school year by fall break, right? So if you want somebody to stay by fall break, hey, Daniel, love what you're doing in third grade math. Want you here this year and next year. Let's already start talking about what the role could look like to keep you growing into next year. I recognize it's February, so if you just panicked, hit pause on the podcast.
Yeah, all your people are not leaving. Don't worry.
But then if you have not asked your people to stay, I would encourage you, press pause and go talk to your teachers you want to stay and say, I want you to stay. I think the irreplaceables from TNTP back in 2013 taught us, if you do not ask your best performing teachers to stay, they will leave. So just ask them to stay, number one. And then number two, because you also asked for what's the immediate thing they can do? If somebody's leaving, ask them why, but not in a way of trying to talk them into staying, but literally ask and listen, because that's going to inform other people that may be leaving.
Do you collect data on sort of reasons why people are choosing new jobs? I don't know. This is just off the cuff, but I would be curious if there was any trends that you're noticing on that front.
Well, we did not prepare this ahead of time, everybody. So I'm in my next to last set of classes for my doctorate, and I'm in qualitative right now. And that is the survey I'm preparing, is for people who have shifted jobs. What were the things that caused you to leave? But no, I wanted to dig in a bit more qualitatively to look at what are the themes, and are they universal themes, or when we break apart by identity groups, are there things that are affecting specific identities more than others?
All right, so we'll do a follow-up episode on that. Let's talk more about proactive retention strategies, because I think a lot of times this is the challenge, right? There's so many priorities that school leaders are dealing with. There's always a fire to be put out. There's always a family phone call to make, a building that has a facilities, nightmare going on. And so, like you said, fall break, you should already be having this conversation. I'm guessing there's people who hear that and are thinking, oh my goodness, another thing that I'm behind on or not doing. Could you talk us through maybe some practical examples of proactive retention strategies that don't require, moving heaven and earth, but are more things that can be baked into the regular life cycle of a school?
Yes, and so I'm going to do a yes and. So I do think they're practical, right? So, and I go back to literally asking people to stay, literally listening. If you don't have a cabinet of teacher leaders who sit around a room with you where you can bounce ideas off of, do those things. Okay. I think ultimately, though, there are a few shifts I wanted to highlight where I've seen folks really excel in teacher. So the first place I'm going to name is a school here in Memphis called Libertas, which is a Montessori school. And they have had almost 100% teacher retention year over year. They didn't do it with money, right? They certainly pay a salary. They pay a competitive salary. One thing that they did was they started an infant and toddler room at their school. And so now if you're an educator, you don't have to worry about finding a daycare. You bring your child to work with you. And a number of those students are starting to matriculate into kindergarten in the same building, right?
That's amazing.
Amazing, right? And when I talked to Bob, who's their school leader, I said, how did you think of that? He's like, well, people were quitting because of daycare. What made a daycare? And then I was like, how did you fund that? And it's half students from the neighborhood and it's half students from the faculty all in one place. And the DHS grant funds it. So a bit of creative thinking with funds that are readily available. Okay. That's number one. The second is a broader conversation, because you asked, how can we rethink the teaching role? right? And that's been a conversation where people are like, what does it look like? Is it teacher leaders, et cetera? And I've had this epiphany because for the last 3 school years, being a chief academic officer on a college campus of the K-12 schools, not the professors. But, we're doing morning duty, we're doing afternoon duty, and I'm watching professors walk to and from their offices. They're not doing duty, right? They're not in the cafeteria watching the freshmen through seniors. And I recognize the age difference, but it's made me think, what are the non-instructional demands that we put on kindergarten through 12th grade faculty members that we don't put on higher ed faculty members? Because higher ed faculty members are staying longer, right? That could be tenure, that could be other things, but they get to research. They do grumble about teaching, but they do teach, right? But we're not asking them to do what I would say are like ancillary duties that we would be asking K-12 teachers to do. So what does it look like to hire a bench of teacher assistants, right? And you say, you're running tier 2 intervention, you're running morning cafeteria and evening duty, right? Like, how do we take things off of teachers' plates to where they can focus? And the second thing, Daniel, I got to make a plug for is second epiphany I had. My best buddy's a primary care physician. We took this hike about a year and a half ago, and he asked, why do you think people are quitting teaching? I was like, man, a number of things. And I started to tell him like what the day-to-day of being a teacher is like. And he said, that's insane. He's like, I'm a primary care physician. If somebody has a heart issue, I refer them to a cardiologist. And if somebody has a GI issue, they go to a gastroenterologist. Like, I'm not expected to know every part of your body. I'm expected to provide tier 1 support. And I was like, tier 1, y'all call it tier 1? We call it tier 1, right? But there's this epiphany I have where we treat general educators like they're supposed to be subject matter experts in every particular part of instructional design, delivery, special needs. And that really served as an impetus. In this last year, at university schools, we put together a wellness center. And at our wellness center, we have speech language pathology, we have school psychology, we have a board certified behavior analyst. We have all of the subject matter experts that are in one location that deploy. So our general educators are not expected to know everything. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means that there are folks with particular skill sets and licenses that can support. And I think that if you take that pressure off, the non-instructional pressure off, and you ask your general educators to stay, that you have a higher likelihood of them sticking around.
Right. Yeah, the combination of those two things starts to get pretty powerful. One of the last things you mentioned that I wanted to ask about was sort of the third pillar being real. You talked about respect, but you also talked about autonomy. And I think flexibility and autonomy often come hand in hand. A lot of times people have this idea that they want to be their own boss. That can also have its own challenges. Being your own boss means you have a very, very challenging boss. But I wanted to ask you from an autonomy perspective, this tends to be a balancing act for leaders, right? I want to empower you to do your work. Trust me. I want you to go do those things. I don't want you coming into my office, with all the problems and none of the solutions. But it's a balancing act, right? Because people need to be coached and developed and encouraged. What have you seen, just either by way of organizations who've done this well or themes in the market for what does it look like to give teachers autonomy that they're looking for while also not kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just putting the blinders on and saying, well, our teachers, they wanted to be the CEO of their classroom, figure it out.
I think managed autonomy is the word that I always use, right?
Okay.
I think autonomy is great, but to your point, there are a lot of dangers that come with just pure autonomy, right? I also think that autonomy is a bit of a seesaw with consequences, right? And there are positive consequences that can come as a result of our work. There are negative consequences, and we learn from all of them. Where I've seen it done really well is I've had the distinct pleasure over the last 3 years of working with 4 incredibly strong school leaders. We had maybe 6 vacancies across our 4 schools last year. I mean, they're I would put them best in the business. They all believe in managed autonomy. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that you're picking your own curriculum, right? But that does mean you get a voice in the curriculum that we pick. That doesn't mean that your lesson design is fully agnostic of what other people are doing, right? But the way that they've built this thread is that we have a community of decision making and we have a community of accountability, right? And so we come together at the table to make decisions. We come together at the table to look at the results. But they also put it through the lens, Daniel, of what is the student experience? Because if you're teaching sixth grade science and I'm teaching seventh grade science and our two classrooms are completely different, whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent as a student, that's mind-boggling. Similarly, if you're sixth grade math and I'm sixth grade English and you're literally have 5 minutes in between our classes and they're completely different, that can also be jarring for kids. And so I really have appreciated that it's autonomy and decision making, but I've actually seen it more of people just want clarity of what decisions are theirs and what their decision rights are rather than all the decisions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think the managed autonomy framework is a good overlay. All right, so let's as we come to a close here, I want to talk about using the Jobs Blast a little bit. As you mentioned recently, now your full-time main hustle. Where do people go to check out the Jobs Blast? Where should they go to learn more? And what are really kind of the audiences you're trying to serve?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a website, k12jobsblast.org, and that's the homepage. If you need to reach me, it's Josh at k12jobsblast.org. So easy enough. I think some people, I worry some people are going to hear, this is his main hustle, he's going to start charging. Absolutely not. So my red line is never charge a penny from a single job seeker. Number one. Number two, never sell any job seekers information. Because I've been asked, right? Like, will you sell your list? I will not sell the list, right?
Yeah.
And that's a hard no for me on both fronts. You will see 100% of the jobs for free. So if you are a K-12 teacher, a leader, a superintendent, whoever you are, if you are out there looking, you will see all the jobs. If you are an organization, you will still have free access to post any job you want, right? If you have a career page that is not already hooked up, so there's 144 sites that feed into the jobs board, but if you want to be 145, you just email me, right? There's no charge. It is in everyone's best interest for there to be transparency of what jobs are out there, right? Where the Jobs Blast makes money, right, to be transparent, is there are people who want to advertise their jobs, right? And so when you go to add a job, if you want your job to go to the top, you can choose going to the top for 45 days. If you want there to be a LinkedIn post, if you want to be in the newsletter that goes out once a month, and all three of those have, I think, pretty reasonable charges. And then there's another level of service I've added now that this is the full time, where I can either source for you, right? I'm not going to give you the names, but if I reach out to Daniel and he says, I'd love to throw my hat in the CFO, great. Now I can tell them Daniel exists, right? I don't give the names out without your permission, but that's that. And then if you want me to run a full search, I can help do that as well. Where I think I add value beyond that, though, is rethinking what your school structure, what your retention, like if you want a thought partner on that, that's where I think that I bring a unique set of perspective and value. But ultimately, if they go to K12jobsblast.org, that has the adding a job link, the sign up link, the jobs board, everything's in one place.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll link to all of those in the show notes as we always do, and we'll try and lay it out nicely for organizations or job seekers who might be listening to this. Outside of the Jobs Blast, we always like to ask our guests who come on the show if they have any particular resources that they've found helpful to them personally, professionally. And so I was curious, and you could take this from the lens of job seeking or kind of organizational talent development or otherwise, but anything come to mind, any other resources we can point folks to?
Yeah, so this is totally separate from the Jobs Blast, but I'm in my last part of my doctorate. And so transparently, my child is autistic, and I have now learned that I am autistic, and my dissertation is on autism and supports for autistic adolescents. And so when I saw that question, it's like, everyone has to read Uniquely Human and the Politics of Autism. And I encourage anybody who's listening, because again, just on the surface, I don't think it takes a statistician to realize that diagnostic rates for neurodivergent is going up significantly. And it's not because there's an epidemic. It just means we are better suited to identify neurodivergent needs. And so what I would encourage anybody to do who's listening, if you're in a K-12 setting, to be an advocate for the rising number of identified neurodivergent students and neurodivergent staff members. Those two books, Politics of Autism and Uniquely Human, are the best in the business.
All right, we'll add them to the list. Josh, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.